Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I say everyone, Susan and Annabelle. We're a slightly smaller group than we were last time. We're hoping that we are joined by one other cluster lead shortly during this conversation. So Eilir Hughes, who's the cluster lead for Dwyfor up in North Wales, is on holiday in France. So is hoping to join us at some point. So hopefully we see Eilir in a little bit. And for the benefit of perhaps people who are watching this video for the first time, we'll just do some other little introductions. So I'm Sam Hall, co-founder and managing director of UMA. UMA is a not-for-profit social enterprise based in Aberystwyth, and we exist with the purpose of creating the conditions for exceptional care for the people of Wales. And I'm joined today by two other cluster leads who can introduce themselves. So perhaps Susan?
Yeah, hello. I'm Susan Davies. I am the non-clinical community director for the Cardiff West cluster, which effectively means I have a practice management background, and I am the sole lead at the moment for, as I say, Cardiff West.
Thanks, Susan. Thank you for joining us today. Annabelle.
Hi, I'm Annabelle Holtam. I'm NTN lead for South Monmouthshire, and I'm also a GP partner up in Mount Pleasant practice in Chepstow.
Fabulous. Great. So just to reconnect with where we're at and the purpose of these conversations. So this is the second in a series of 3 video conversations. The last time we came together, we talked a little bit just about what your experience is on the ground with the Accelerated Cluster Development Programme, talking through some of the challenges and opportunities within that. And at the end of that conversation, we talked about what good would look like when we met again. And so the purpose of today's conversation is about reconnecting with that and to understand what actually happened as compared to what you thought might happen. So hopefully we hear from Eilir at some point in the next 20 minutes or so. He'll be able to join us. But in the meantime, I think perhaps we'll just kick off. So if I come to you, Annabelle, first,
Sure.
do you want to just recap on some of the things that you talked about last time, and then just, let us know how it's gone?
Yeah, for sure. So in South Monmouthshire, we decided a while ago to form a community interest company. It was sort of a reflection of us feeling under immense pressure and trying to find alternative solutions to essentially support us as an area, and work out what we can do better for the local population, looking at gaps in service and what we can do. So we have been meeting for some time, and slowly getting there. We have a name. We're going to be the World Orchid Wellbeing Community Interest Company, and I can also cover where we are. Sam, do you want where we are now? Yeah. Okay. So we've are now looking at, we've got draft articles together now describing the remit of the members and directors, and we've also got a KIC 36, which is looking to get ourselves incorporated with the Companies House. So this is all drafted and together now in principle. It's fairly sort of far-reaching and wide because I want to allow us to have as much flexibility in what we decide to do ultimately. We are also working up a sort of business plan for what to look like, fundamentally how we get the kick off the road, which I think may be one of the biggest challenges, because you start with a lot of upfront costs and plans, but no money often, and working out how to do that. And then looking more in the future at sort of proper business plans that will leave us self-funded and maybe less dependent on one source of funding, where we want ourselves to be resilient financially so that we can continue and develop services and continue them and not be dependent on one source. So that's where we are at the moment. It's all quite exciting and feels very positive at the moment.
Great. So that's fabulous, because when we met last time, so you said that what you would hope is that you'd be incorporated and that you'd be able to talk a little bit about what the plan was. And actually, you're almost there, aren't you? I mean, it does take a little while to jump through some of the legal hoops and all the bureaucracy, but that's fantastic news. Can you talk a little bit about the plans and how that links with the health board's mobilisation of ACD? Because I understand, Nair and Bevan have had some really ambitious plans around mobilising to implement ACD, and your experience of that since we last spoke.
In terms of the health boards,
yeah,
it is challenging for us in Monmouthshire. We're an affluent county that is generally on top of a lot of health promotion, and so when the health board are looking at wider equalities of healthcare, I understand that there's a degree of threat with Monmouthshire getting on top of more things, and then there being further inequality. So we are trying to work through that with the health board at the moment. There was a degree of delay because I hoped to have some funding to get to the point of incorporation. So things were paused for the time period to get to there. In the end, I managed to mobilise some of our NCN budget, which was then agreed by the wider NCN team that was appropriate. So we're using that budget instead of the health board providing funding through the accelerated cluster development pot, I think largely because it's just Monmouthshire looking at it. It is still being worked through. There isn't a definite answer, but it caused a degree of delay, which made me decide that we needed to look at other routes. So we've only really had kick-off a few weeks ago, so it is moving quickly again. It's just that, it is often, I think, with this process, we have to it has to just stop and pause for little periods of time. So yeah, that was the delay with that. But it is progressing now. And yeah, I think there are exciting plans, I would argue. We're looking at ways we can help the health board and help support our population at the same time, because they're not mutually exclusive. We're particularly focusing on non-injurious falls. So these are times when people fall on the floor, stay on the floor for, I've got the stats, so I don't sort of quote them directly, but very long periods of time. I think anybody in the room and possibly listening in will be aware that the ambulance response times are suboptimal, and I think they're particularly suboptimal for individuals on the floor. So by the time the ambulance arrived, they've been on the floor for so long. They then go to hospital, stuck in an ambulance outside for a period of time, and then in hospital sometimes for quite a long time, an enormous cost to the health board and to the individual. And so we're trying to find a better way of keeping someone at home and keeping them safe. And we think there's a way that we can do that through actually individuals funding the kick at a low cost to therefore have a service that's much quicker. And by doing that, we develop autonomy within the kick, whilst providing, in my view, an improvement in the service at the moment, which is inevitably, because we're medics, tends to medicalise things. But I think, we might be able to do better. So that's what we're looking at the moment. It is really, really early days on that front. And I need to work it out, and I need to work out all the costings, the business case for it, and we need to work with the health board. But it's that sort of thing where you can see that prick of light of an idea that you think that could really work, and we could be really quite proud of if we achieve. So yeah, that's sort of where the business, and that'd be the starting point really, and then the offshoots will then build off the development or not of this plan. So as we have increased funding through it, we're then able to provide more and more different services in association with it that then help build community resilience for the population. That's sort of, sorry, it's still vague while I work it out, but that's the essence of it.
No, and I think it's that kind of detail that will be interesting to others to hear, because you may well find that idea has sparked something in others who are listening or watching in today. And just before I come to Susan, just one final question. Just your the transition of your cluster into the new governance framework that is as part of the Accelerated Cluster Development Programme. Have you started to see that shift now into collaboratives, cluster, and then attending pan-cluster planning group?
Yeah, essentially we had it to a point already. So in Iron Bevan, we were NCN's neighbourhood care networks. We generally keeping original terminology, but I think that would be I think your collaborative cluster group. So we had that, and we had the Integrated Service Partnership Board, which is a collection of all the different partners, third sector, Monmouth County Council. What we were doing before, in my view, was we were sort of the collection. So if you imagine all the information for what was happening in different places was just flowing in from the outside into a kind of like a big lake. but that lake wasn't going anywhere. So it was a repository for information coming in. Sorry, I always describe things, but what was happening is we were just all aware of what other people were doing, but we weren't using the kind of collective nous of the room to develop new services. So what the transition we are now going through is now making this not just a collective of information, but making it a decision maker and delivery group for future services, which has now led to this programme as discussed, as we all collectively agreed this should be the focus and this would have the most benefit. So already we are working together to work out what our priorities would be, and also the kind of collective feedback for things that they didn't think would be as easy or would have the legs after many years of experience in the room of doing other services, and felt that we might come up against the wall quite quickly. So it's really, really useful. It's not just an exercise. I also sort of felt like we were given direction by people that understood the services and were really open to delivering things. And again, it's sort of like the KIC, members of the KIC also sit sort of integrated with the ISPB, and we're also developing an ISPB operational group that runs parallel, doing the workload task and finish type group that then feeds back into the ISPB. So yeah, it's really exciting. Monmouth County Council's gone Labour, and so we've got sort of a whole new group of councillors. I am apolitical in a sense, makes no difference who they are, but there is definitely a real interest from people that have just started and real wish to do something new and different. So I think it's driving change as well. So yeah, that's sort of where it's sitting with ACD, and it's working well as a feedback.
Because that was one of the other things that you'd hoped to do by this conversation, I recall, was tightening up that governance and moving some of those committees or those forums into much tighter decision-making action, collectives, rather than perhaps, the more traditional meeting heavy setup. Great, congratulations. It sounds really, really exciting. Just come to you then, Susan. So tell us how to make a bit of a recap on what you hoped would happen and what's actually occurred.
Well, we were hoping for, and we have very much had, strong and frequent communication between the CDs and the Health Board. We've had numerous meetings where the new structure has been discussed. There is some wrestling going on as to what does this mean going forwards, appreciating that it is a transition year, but we need, how is this going to work? When you have your next meeting, what will it look like? So, for example, in the West, as a nod to the ACD, June's meeting was broken down into what I described as the new cluster section of the agenda, where the community pharmacist came in and public health. And then the second half of the agenda was more collaborative, where we went through the usual contract issues that we had to discuss. In terms of the Health Board, we've had discussions about the new structure, how it will affect our work, how will it affect the work, I say, of the CDs and the collaborative, the funding for the additional work that we anticipate. It will affect CDs and the admin and support, but it also affects the locality and PKIC and how they work. So we're still at the moment mapping out what the additional work looks like, the frequency of the meetings, what support would be required to make those meetings happen. And when we can quantify that, we can probably then work out what resource is needed and what locality time is also needed. So I understand we've picked a lot of information. We've put together some proposals as a group of leads, and then Cardiff and Vale will be taking that back centrally for a discussion. And I'm also doing a comms exercise with the GPs individually, the cluster representatives at GP practice level, just to get a feel as to what they think about this and how they grasp it. Sometimes they have been to meetings, but if you explain something one-to-one, sometimes you get a different angle on it. So there's a lot of work still to do to cascade this down to practice level.
Great, and I'd be interested in your perspective as a non-clinical cluster lead, because what is emerging for you as to kind of where you might fit in
It
the
is a
new
question. Yeah,
structure?
it's a question we're asking because we have 3 non-clinical cluster leads in Cardiff. So, yeah, does the collaborative need, in addition to us, a GP to bring their knowledge to the new cluster, or can we take it? Then you start to go into issues of funding. Is that person available and wanting it? We bring, as non-clinicians, different but possibly equal skills to the table. So it's, yeah, as I say, strong communication going on with the health board to try and unravel it. I'm not sure, are there any other sole non-clinical needs in Wales? Because that would be one for Emma to have a discussion about, and how we fit. Terms of reference are being looked at, and work is being done.
Right. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there. Certainly Geraint up in North Wales is another non-clinical cluster lead that springs to mind. And I'm sure there are others. There are some practice manager leads who are co-cluster leads as well.
Yeah.
And Susan, in your cluster or in your locality, have you participated in any of the pan cluster planning group activities that have emerged?
We have our first pan cluster workshop, we're calling it, I believe, the 22nd of July.
Oh, great.
So it will be, yes, so it's very much the formative stage. How will this look? What can everyone give? Who will be attending? So I can probably feedback next time on how successful that was. We have many questions, as does everybody, and yeah, particularly on participation.
And is there any ambition or moves within your cluster or locality to perhaps start to progress something similar to what Annabelle's done in terms of delivery vehicles?
We haven't looked at it yet, but we are all conscious of the advantages and disadvantages of the health board holding the budget and how that works to advantages, and also can occasionally cause some issues. But we haven't gone down that route yet, but I'm watching how Annabelle works it, and I think there's another kick in Cardiff and Vale as well to keep an eye on and monitor and learn from.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I had a good chat with Hugh and Tess from Cardiff Southwest last week. So yeah, lots of interesting developments there. Unfortunately, it looks like Eilir is not going to be joining us today. So perhaps what we can do is I'll pick up his feedback on what progress he's made up on the Llyn on another call. So just as by way of checking out to bring this conversation to a close, one of the things that Emma's role is to host the All Wales Cluster Lead group, and there's obviously a transition year for that group too, as the governance structures of collaborative working shift across Wales. So it'd be interesting to hear from you around what role you think that network or networks across Wales might play in bringing about better care for our communities through clusters and collaboratives going forward. Susan, I might come back to you straight away if that's okay.
Well, I think the main learning I get always from it is the sharing of best practice and the sharing of ideas and picking out what's working, what's not working, what the barriers are, how people are moving forward, not only with the projects, but also with the ACD. We would very much like to see a consistent approach across Wales so that everybody gets the same support and resource towards achieving what is an all Wales group. So as a vehicle then for us sharing our thoughts, I think Emma has a very important role.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Susan. Annabelle, the role of networks going forward?
For me, it's been alluded to. I mean, it's a quid pro quo to Susan's point that she's only a practice. You're not only but you're not a clinical lead, but a lot of the leads are clinical, and we're not business managers. So what we lack is your gain, I would say, Susan, as you're used to running a business and things, and you have all that training. I think I was about to say very little, but I think that's probably even an exaggeration. Probably no training occurs when you become a GP partner for business management and things. So you learn a lot on your feet. I'd like to think that we've got a fairly savvy operation in South Monmouthshire. I can't comment beyond that. I've got some smart GPs, but ultimately we're quite smart at running a GP practice, not a community interest company, and also sort of not always delivering complex services outside. Yep, I agree. Sharing of ideas, always useful to have a kind of just other things that have gone well. I agree with Susan. Spend a lot of time, you know, often my best ideas haven't been mine, or not even my ideas, though. They've been something I've spotted and then shaped for my area. I'm a big believer in not having anything too centralized. You'll always hear that from me. I think we're all, you know, we share things in common, but we are often fundamentally different areas, but there can be some areas that have good overlap and relax. So it's good to see what others are doing. But I think more than that, what I see and what I think I've mentioned to you before, Sam, is I think what we're collectively doing is very similar in those that are forming KICs or trying to evolve to greater autonomy as clusters, and to have the quite specific business knowledge of how to form a KIC, how to develop detailed business plans for it, how to have somebody there from the offset. Really, I'm in the easy streaks at the moment. I can design a business plan with, you know, and it can be all singing and all dancing, but I need someone to get it going, and that's not going to be me realistically working 1 day a week. And so I need, and it's not, you know, I'm probably more of an ideas person than a getting things done, and so I need somebody to work with me to get things done. And I think those people, if they could be linked in with a central hub that provides its resource support, whether that's data analysts, needs assessments, but also kind of the basic operational guidance for how to get things going, how to get funding starting, and also sharing how we're doing this. Every different KIC for different areas, well outside of this, is going to be designing business plans, but we're all going to have a fairly sort of unique setup in that we're overlapping. We're looking at finance from health board and maybe external as well. And how we do that, how we get that first year to 2 years done, because I think those are going to be the hardest when there's no funding and you haven't had sufficient investment to prove that you're safe to invest in. I think that's really challenging time. And some organisation like YMA that have lived and breathed that and got off the ground. I think just to have some sort of central hub that can provide that support. And I don't think it has to be unique to KICs. It can be for other developments in the area, but also I controversially don't think that KICs have to be about GP partners. I know that's what's happened so far in KICs, but I think KICs for areas where there's struggling GPs and there's just not the time or resource to do it, could form from a sort of collection of the third sector. We've got third sector representation, council representation, etc. on our KIC. So if they could match something similar for those struggling, I think those areas will need probably even more support if it's not coming directly from the lead. And I think, again, if we could have central core support that's shared and we all then benefit from, and operators that are linked in with directly with a central hub, I think that's how I see it. If you're going to realistically, yes, 1 or 2, maybe I'll get it off the ground, maybe I won't. But if you're going to look at really on a much wider scale, you know, every area having at least 1 KIC or development of such, I think you need stronger central support to realistically achieve it.
Yeah, and I'm noticing, I mean, it's very kind that you both kind of mentioned providing or enabling those networks, and I appreciate that. And it doesn't have to be I think there's something about the function, there's something about that connectivity that feels important. And for me, I still think there's a big gap in engagement around the value of the network. because we do have good engagement. We do have a number of cluster leads that come regularly, but also there are a number that don't. And I'm curious around why that is. And it may be that it is indeed those communities and those GPs and other professionals in those areas that need the help the most. And it's kind of trying to understand, how do you create that value proposition that brings that help to those people as well. So for me, there's probably something about moving with the willing, the people who are the early adopters like yourself, Annabelle, but also what is the offer to those that haven't engaged, and why. Great. Well, I think that's probably the end of our discussion for today. So we will catch up again, if you're up for it, in another couple of months. Hopefully we can get Eilir to that one. He's not allowed to go to France, more than twice in the space of 2 months. No, that's just a joke. I'm sure I'll catch up with Eilir and see if we can try and add his voice into this discussion in post-production. But thank you so much for your time, and look forward to speaking to you again. Thank you very much. Hi, Eilir. It's really nice to see you again. For the benefit of those who are watching for the first time, would you mind just introducing yourself and just letting us know a little bit about you and your area?
Sure. So I'm Eilir Hughes. I'm a GP in Nevin, which is on the Llyn Peninsula in northwest Wales, but I'm also the local cluster lead. The cluster is called Dwyfor and North Meirionydd. So it's a very rural cluster of approximately 35,000 people in terms of population, and it's unique in terms of various elements, such as the fact that the Welsh language is the sort of the dominant language here, and also it's a very it's a tourist hotspot. So our population fluctuates hugely during periods of popular holiday times in the year.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And this is the second of our three-part series of conversations. And last time when we spoke, you set out some ambitions around where you'd hoped to have gotten to by this point. So we've got a bit of an opportunity today just to reflect on that and to talk a little bit about where you have got to. So, so how is accelerated cluster development progressing in Dwyfor and Meirionydd, and also kind of your sense of how that's playing out in Betsy and North Wales? That'd be great to understand.
Sure. So the approach, more, from my understanding, sort of more broadly in North Wales, is that at the moment there's sort of more of an engagement process going on with stakeholders, if you will, and that's kind of been done on the sort of 3 area model. So that's effectively east, centre, and west, and events have been held, workshops where stakeholders have been invited for a whole day for discussions to be had as to how each area by themselves see ACDs and sort of what's the sort of the vision for them in the future for our areas. So we had an event for the West about 3-4 weeks ago now, in Caernarfon, and all the cluster leads, the 4 cluster leads in the west of North Wales attended, along with people from the health board, from the local management area team, and from the local authorities. And what was good about this event was that it was an opportunity for us who are on the coalface, who are already involved in clusters and in the sort of the broader sort of community health provision. We were given the opportunity to give our opinions effectively as to how we see things to the future, what needs to be done, and how we see the current players, if you will, who would try and make this happen, what they need for them to achieve and be successful. And I think what it allowed us to prioritize was the fact that there's certain elements of which may have been broadly accepted, that maybe you need a smaller group in the at the higher level. So what we're talking about there is I've forgotten the name of it. The
pan cluster planning groups.
That's it, the pan cluster planning group. That doesn't necessarily need to be as broad and as big as what was initially suggested, and actually that group needs more of a governance function, and that the membership of the clusters per se, by all means, can be broad and should be broad, so that all the elements can then be brought together. But when it comes to the pan cluster planning group, that the voice of the cluster should be listened to, and that role should be more in terms of the governance of the function of the cluster. There is also a discussion which is more sort of pertinent to us here in North West Wales as to whether the two clusters, one being Dwyfor and North Meirionydd, which is the one that I'm leading, and the other one in the south of Gwynedd, which is called the South Meirionydd cluster, whether do we need the two clusters in terms of the vision of the future of clusters of the ACD, or whether indeed we need to maybe think about amalgamating even, co-working, or actually merging into one large rural cluster where a lot of the elements are similar in terms of challenges and in terms of the needs, and then the other cluster within the county of Gwynedd, which is Arfon, would be broadly viewed as an urban cluster. So effectively in this local authority of Gwynedd, you'd have two clusters, an urban and a rural one, but that needs to be discussed further. So I think that's probably one of the next steps that we need to look at.
That's really interesting, because I remember last time, I think you were due to meet with the health boards. I think one of those events were due to happen either that afternoon or quite soon after we last spoke. So it's great that that's happened, and it feels like your understanding of what the intention is in across Betsy and in the Northwest feels clearer.
Yeah, I mean, that event needed to happen, and I think it had, by that point when we had first met, it had happened maybe in one of the other two areas, but it hadn't just quite happened for us in the West. So that needed to be done to bring the people together. Of course, not everyone was able to come, unfortunately, but I hope now this will be the start of the momentum, because I think there wasn't much of a momentum here before then. But I hope now that this will move on to the next step, and that we'll be able to help in the modelling of how this would work for us here, because as I said at the beginning, we do have pretty unique challenges here, as do all the other clusters in terms of staffing, and I think that the key message, I suppose, was that we need to have that strong influence in terms of how the services are planned and delivered in the area. Because at the moment, that's the frustration across the area in terms of the clusters, that we haven't been able and haven't been successful in doing that in terms of since the clusters have been in place.
And that actually that brings me neatly on to one of the reflections around this process. So moving forward, obviously you and I have met through the All Wales Cluster Lead Group, and that group appears to be delivering some value for those people that are participating in it. And there's a question around what the role of that group, or indeed networks of peers, will have in enabling the vision of ACD to be delivered into the future. So you talked about kind of action to influence planning and delivery and real change on the ground. Have you got a view on the role of the All Wales Cluster Lead Group and networks in making progress and real transformation for our communities going forward?
I mean, I've always found a huge amount of benefits when you get the opportunity to talk and engage with colleagues, particularly when they're outside of your own health board. Because in North Wales, traditionally, I would say, in terms of the cluster leads, we've always had a good collaborative group where we met regularly, had formal meetings as a group of North Wales cluster leads. But sometimes, there are elements which, we find as challenging, stumbling blocks, maybe even disagreements, in how things should be done. And it's actually quite useful when you are able to speak with colleagues from other health boards, maybe where they might have found a way to overcome those challenges, or even other good ideas. And of course, we've also been able to provide them with you know, those solutions sometimes. I'll give an example. So if you remember the last meeting, we had our colleague in Monmouthshire, of course, talking about the development of the KIC, or the CICs. We spoke about that in our session, in our workshop for the Northwest area, and the impression that we were given was that, you know, North Wales CICs isn't viewed as an option really, that's thought to be something that the North Wales area would want to proceed with. Now, personally, I haven't got a particular opinion on that, but I'd like to know why that opinion seems to be the main kind of approach towards CICs here in North Wales, because they may well be the case that CICs may well be of benefit to a particular cluster, or to several one of us. And so, as an example of the Pan Wales group, it'd be great where we could actually hear of experiences such as in Monmouthshire, and obviously the Red Kite CIC in Powys, and get to hear about the progress, the successes, the challenges, the benefits of these different ways of working.
Yeah, and I've observed that in my role as kind of host of some of those conversations, and I think one of the things that the All Wales Cluster Lead Group has also been able to do is to not just have the knowledge shared within the group, but also then, you know, this video is part of sharing your message with the National Primary Care Board, and actually being able to then connect to some of those central forums to be able to share your reflections. So that's my observation of some of the, you know, how that local learning becomes national understanding, and then highlighting what's actually going on the ground, which is sometimes quite difficult to get a sense of that when you're looking at something on an all Wales basis.
Absolutely.
Fab. Well, Eilir, thank you so much for joining us.
All right.
We got there in the end. And if you're up for it, we'll have one more conversation in a month or so.
In a month or so. That should be fine.
Thank you so much, Eilir.